Welcome everyone to our FSO 101 series, Debunking the Myth of the Foreign Service Office. Sir, position in the United States State's Department. We are now in our 5th session of the 8-session series that we started earlier this year, where our goal as WCAPS Global Advocacy and Diplomacy Working Group is to ensure that we provide you with not only the knowledge necessary to enter into the Foreign Service, but also the ecosystem. And gratefully, we have so many diplomats that have taken time out of their crazy schedules, especially with what's going on right now in the world, to share with you their journey, to provide you with insights into the field, and most importantly, to encourage you to enter the field, because we need you for such a time as this. So thank you to all of you for joining us today. I am Maritza Adonis. I serve as the chair of the Global Advocacy and Diplomacy Working Group with WCAPS. It was founded by our now Undersecretary, Bonnie Jenkins. The purpose of WCAPS is to serve as an ecosystem for professional development for women of color interested in the fields of peace, security, and conflict transformation. Today's session we have featuring our most popular cones based on our survey earlier this year, political and public diplomacy. As you all know, as of now, there are 5 key areas or 5 cones in the Foreign Service: consular cone, economic cone, management, political and public diplomacy. We've held sessions on the economic management cones. Today is our session on political and public diplomacy. And our next session on consular will be on September 28th at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So without further ado, I will introduce our distinguished guest diplomats for today. Again, for the record, that both Diplomat Khandil and Diplomat Raymond will be speaking in their personal capacities, and that what they'll be sharing today does not reflect the positions of the United States Department or the U.S. government. So today we have with us, representing the Public Diplomacy Cone, Diplomat Kedenard Raymond. Diplomat Raymond is currently serving a detail at the National Security Council as a Director for Strategic Communications for the Press Directorate. She has previously served as the Public Affairs Chief for the U.S. Embassy in Port of Spain, Trinidad and Tobago, Press Attaché at the U.S. Embassy in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, Press Officer in the State Department Bureau of Public Affairs, Political Officer for the Turkey Desk, Deputy Public Affairs Officer in Pakistan, and Consular Officer in Montreal, Canada. Diplomat Raymond is a term member on the Council on Foreign Relations, a 2017 Center for New American Security Next Generation Fellow, a 2017 Penn Kimball Fellow, and a 2008 Charles B. Rangel International Affairs Fellow. She is also an alumna of American University and Georgetown University, as well as a proud Haitian American. Yes. Next, representing our political cone for today is Diplomat Khulood Khandil. Diplomat Khandil joined the United States Foreign Service in 2011 as a political cone officer. Her most recent assignment was in Saudi Arabia, serving as a Deputy Chief of Political and Economic Affairs Section. She has previously served at the United States Consulate General in the Embassy, Jerusalem, Baghdad, and in the Washington Office of the United Nations Political Affairs and the Syria Desk in the Near Eastern Affairs Bureau. She holds a bachelor's degree from George Mason University and a master's from the University of Maryland. Welcome to our distinguished diplomats. How are you guys feeling today?
Still standing. We're here.
I am sure. Again, thank you so much for your time today. I know there's a lot going on in the world, so we sincerely appreciate the time that you're taking to inspire, encourage, and most importantly, educate our members on what is it like to be a Foreign Service officer. So I'll start with you first, Diplomat Raymond. Can you talk to us a little bit about your FSO journey? Just a couple of minutes ago, looks like you've covered almost every track, which is very, very exciting. We've had questions in the past about, can I work in multiple cones? Do I get stuck in a cone? Which cone is better or not? So we just want to hear a little bit about your journey. You can
Sure.
start with what inspired you to join the Foreign Service?
So first, I'm honored to be here. Please call me Kedenard. Diplomat Raymond is much too formal and totally unnecessary. What inspired me, motivated me, interested me in the Foreign Service was what began as just an awareness of first the Caribbean community, and then because of the situation, which I'm sure many of all are familiar with in Haiti, is the issue of international development and what I could realistically do to help in the course of my career. That led me to study international development at American University, where I did a couple of trips, one to Kenya and one to Burma, where I really started to explore what international development means and was exposed to, USAID and like foreign service officers, and the fact that sometimes international development and foreign policy go hand in hand. So that made me very curious. And then from there at American University, went on to intern at the State Department, where I met Pickering and Rangel fellows who were like, hey, you should consider this. And they really debunked the myth that I had in my head that diplomats were all white men. Because I saw, these amazing dynamic young people from disadvantaged backgrounds, people of color, who are like, they're about to go and represent the United States. And so, imagine I was born and raised in Washington, D.C., but I had no concept of like the Foreign Service and all of these things that were essentially in my backyard until I went to the State Department. So, fast forward, joined the Rangel program, went to Georgetown for grad school, where I continued to study development. And then you sort of, walk through what my various postings have been. But my passion now is to make the time and the space to speak to prospective foreign service officers or anyone really that's interested in the world of international affairs. I think it's a lot more accessible than it was when I started out. But I think the fact that I didn't know about it until, going abroad and then sort of being exposed at the State Department is a problem, especially because I live in Washington, D.C. Think about all the amazing prospective diplomats we have around the country that don't see themselves in this, particularly after the previous administration, and don't know that they have space to be themselves in the Foreign Service. So that's what initially motivated me to start, and that's what sort of keeps me going is making sure that other people can see themselves in this position and that are inspired to join.
Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Diplomat Khandil, and again, my apologies for making this so formal for this presentation. I promise I will address you by your first names after we grab coffee. For today, for purposes of this program, we'll keep it formal. Diplomat Khandil, can you share with us your FSO journey? Why did you want to become a Foreign Service officer?
Thank you, Maritza, and thank you, Kedenard. Kedenard is a dear friend. I'm very happy and honored to speak alongside her. I started because I wanted to represent the United States overseas. I felt like there was a shortage of people with my skill set, and that was also borne out by various Government Accountability Office reports. There was a shortage of people with knowledge about the Middle East and Arabic, which was my academic specialty. I studied Middle East studies undergrad. I studied Arabic. I studied abroad in the Middle East. I worked very hard to master the language, which is some advice I give for women on this call, to really master the language. That will really distinguish you from other applicants to the Foreign Service. You don't need to know a foreign language, but whether you learn it after you join or before, it's very important that you really master that language and you really get the nuance. And I had worked very hard on my language skills, and I did not think that they hired people that looked like me or that had names like mine, and I applied and somehow I passed. So that's my other advice to you, is that, everybody is qualified for the Foreign Service. If you have the correct, educational background and skill set, it doesn't have to be somebody with a specific demographic. So even if you don't pass on the first time, keep trying. Some ambassadors shared with me that they had to take the exam 5 times before they passed. So if it's something that you really want, don't give up. So I was fortunate enough to pass the exam, and I volunteered my skill set mainly in the Middle East. And that's how I ended up joining.
Thank you so much for sharing that. There's a recurring theme that both of you have stated in your introductions, is that you didn't know that there was a space for you in the Foreign Service. And that's the principal reason why we decided to do this series, because GAD has been around for about 3 years now with WCAPS. And initially we started a lot of our programming focusing more on cultural diplomacy, introducing our members to different cultures, languages, and on the advocacy side with the fellowships programming. But then we started getting a lot of inquiries from our members that were asking us, what is an FSO? And so even in a amazing ecosystem like WCAPS, there's still members within our ecosystem that doesn't know that this career exists. And so I'm so appreciative you guys are taking time to show them not only that it exists, but that there's a place for them as well too. So as I mentioned when I first started, these two are the most popular cones. I'm not sure if you guys can see the survey, but political and public diplomacy are the top two still, even for this series for today. And so can you walk us through, what does a day in the life look like for your cone? And maybe provide some insights into, maybe some nuances as to how the political officer role might look a little different if you're working in DC versus if you're stationed overseas. Same thing for public diplomacy, if there's any nuances to when you're working in DC or if you're working overseas. We'll start with you first this time, Diplomat Khandil. If you can share with us what is a political officer? What do you guys do? And then walk us through, what does a day in the life look like?
A political officer is responsible for monitoring current events in the specific country or region or topic that they're covering, and interpreting that information for Washington, as well as interpreting that specific information as it relates to US policy interest and the US national interest. So for example, if you're stationed in a country overseas and there's an election coming up, you would be responsible for being familiar with the candidates, assuming that it's a multi-party election. In some countries, that's not the case. You would also have to discuss how certain candidates' election or lack thereof might affect US policy, how it might affect US exports, certain laws that are being under consideration by parliaments or legislation overseas, how that could affect US citizen travel or activity within that specific region, how it might affect neighboring countries. So you're essentially kind of an analyst for the US government. You're kind of a journalist, although all of our publications are internal. So you would be writing cables, and a cable essentially is a record. So you are creating an official record of the United States government that is either classified or unclassified. And if it is classified, eventually it is declassified and it becomes accessible to all Americans, as well as anybody with access to that document through the internet or whatever medium through which it's declassified. So you are essentially creating official records for internal use. And that contrasts with the public diplomacy cone, which is mainly external facing. So our job as political officers is mainly internal facing, if that makes sense. And then Kedenard is responsible for explaining those policies to external audiences, and political officers are responsible for internal to the United States government. If you are serving domestically, you would be on the receiving end of that information from an embassy or a consulate or a mission overseas. And every day is different. It depends. If there's breaking news somewhere, you might be responsible for conveying that information to the White House or to the Department of Defense or whatever agency has equities, as we refer to them, or a stake in whatever that issue is. You might have to represent the State Department's position at a policymaking meeting. If there is some, discussion between agencies about what the U.S. policy should be toward a certain topic or country, you might have to write the paper or prepare a leader in the department for a specific meeting and advocate for a certain position or against a certain position. So really, every day is different. I mean, it's a great job for somebody like me that likes to learn a little about a lot of things. So I would encourage anybody that is interested in this cone to try to learn a little bit about a lot of different things, geographic issues, cultural issues, even things that you might not think you would be interested in, because you never know when you might need something. And there's always some similarities between some certain cultures. I mean, I was surprised, for example, when I was working on a certain issue domestically, and then I went to a country in a completely different region that spoke a completely different language, had a totally different religion, and how similar those two cultures were, and how I was able to apply what I had learned on that specific desk, as we refer to them, or an office within a domestic bureau in the State Department to this particular posting overseas. So any experience that you can gain, even if you feel like it's irrelevant, is applicable. And especially as women, we need to demonstrate that we are even more competent than we are. We have to go out of our way to demonstrate our competence. So any information that you have or experience that you've had is a skill. And that's something I'd also like to emphasize, that even your personal background is a skill. You know, your experience perhaps as a blue woman or a purple woman or whatever, you know, your background is also a skill, and you can relate to certain foreign audiences, or you can also help interpret events in ways that people perhaps of other skill sets and backgrounds might not be able to. So I would encourage you all to emphasize that skill set. And it's something that a mentor of mine emphasized to me, that our backgrounds are skills. You know, being a certain demographic is a skill. And we just, I think, are not necessarily thinking of it like that. And I think that we need to start, I don't want to say marketing because that sounds kind of commercial, but we have to start being able to convey our background as a skill when we are interviewing with any job. You also have to have excellent writing skills. You have to be able to write clearly and concisely and explain things without losing nuance, but also in a way that's accessible to your audience. So you really have to have very strong writing for this cone. You know, try to write as much as you can and try to get really candid feedback about your writing. And good writers are also avid readers. So make sure that you're reading a lot of diverse material, fiction, nonfiction, anything to improve your writing, because it's so critical, and you can't succeed in this cone unless you are a strong writer.
Thank you so much. Diplomat Raymond, if you can walk us through what is a public diplomacy FSO, what does day-to-day life look like, and the contrast between perhaps domestic and serving overseas. And you can also provide some insights into a couple of skills that might be necessary for this cone as well too.
Sure, very happy to. So the first thing that I want to sort of piggyback off of what Khulood said, which is the need to sort of embrace what your background is and what your skills are going into this. Even though we're here to talk about our specific cones, which are political and public diplomacy, foreign service officers are generalists, and we're stronger when we can emphasize that no matter where you drop us in the world, if you need us to do a job, we're going to be able to do it. Just because I specialize in public diplomacy, and even further, I specialize in press. If tomorrow they need me to write an economic cable because everybody else is gone, I need to be able to do that. And so I think that speaks to what Khulood was saying about like reading, devouring things in terms of being curious and making sure that you're reading and making sure that you're staying up to date on things. Don't think that just because you're interested in a career in international affairs, there's no room for you to be interested in the fine arts, and there's no room for you to be interested in engineering or like agriculture. All of that plays a role in being a diplomat. All of that plays a role in being a generalist. And so I just wanted to put that out there too before I forgot that, you know, make sure that you're embracing your whole self and all of the interests that you have and all the curiosities that you have, because they can absolutely play a role in your career. But on public diplomacy, one of the things that we like to say that we're doing is sort of bridging the last 3 feet in terms of diplomacy. So public diplomacy, you know, as the name suggests, is public. It's about America's story. It is about both explaining to foreign audiences what we're about, but then also engaging and bridging the relationships that make foreign policy possible. I think that there is an increasing need for public diplomacy, in my opinion, to be about relatability. I think after the Cold War, there was an assumption, and I'm being very candid here, and this is on the record, but again, not representing like, the US government position, just sort of representing my own opinion. There is a sense that we could just go places and tell people what to do, and we can just go places and assume that people would either acquiesce to what we want or just kind of go along with what we want because we're the United States. Maybe that was true at some point, but I don't think that's true anymore. I think that our recent experiences have shown us that people are more critical. People are a lot more discerning about the United States and our role. And I do think that there's a role for the United States to lead in the world, but we need a lot more sincerity, and we need to find commonalities with, other cultures, other societies, other communities in order to do that. And so that's where I see my role. When I started out in public diplomacy, I was more interested in the cultural and educational aspects of public diplomacy. So culture is like, okay, how am I gonna, teach people about Notorious B.I.G.? Like, I love hip hop. How am I gonna bring hip hop to different communities? And educational is like, okay, we have an incredible opportunity via Fulbright, via UGrad, via YES, via all these different State Department programs to literally bring other people to the United States, to teach them that like education is a force multiplier. Education is how you not only, bring people together, but you allow them to sort of realize their potential, go back to their countries, help build up their countries. And then once I entered the Foreign Service, did a couple of public diplomacy tours and got to dabble and press a little bit, I got very interested in the messaging of policy, because I think as important as things like culture and education are, we also need credible voices. We also need validators, people who look like me, people who look like Khulood, to be able to say, not only are we behind the scenes doing this, but we're messaging because we believe in this. Despite how flawed we are and how many challenges that we continue to overcome to this day. I mean, this week alone has been really difficult. I very much believe in the American dream because I'm a product of it. I very much believe in our story and the ability and what we have to sell to the world. When I get really down and when I get really cynical, my mom, who's a Haitian immigrant, reminds me how great this country is. And so I have no problem being the voice. I have no problem being the face. That's a lot of what public diplomacy is like getting out there and being willing to sort of speak truth to power about the United States and what our policies are. I'm not gonna lie, sometimes that's really hard. In the last administration, I was in Haiti. First, I was at the State Department in our International Media Engagement Office, and then I went to Haiti to serve as the spokesperson. And that was during the time when our former president called Haiti a shithole country. You can imagine how it feels as a US diplomat and as a Haitian American being there representing them, with them asking you like, well, what does that mean? And how could you represent that? And me having to walk a fine line, having to reconcile with, if I feel like a hypocrite, I would never want to paint not necessarily a rosy picture, because we have a lot of high points in this career, but I would never want to suggest that you don't have hard days. And I don't want to suggest that, there aren't times where you're like, I can't do this. There are those times, but I think that there are those times in every single career. And I think that what we're doing is meaningful, it's fulfilling, and it is one of the highest forms of public service that you could give if you feel like you have something to give back. And so whether we're talking about public diplomacy or just being a foreign service officer in general, those are some of the things that I reflect on in terms of this job. DC looks very different from the field. As you mentioned, right now I'm detailing at the National Security Council, which is usually the National Security Council has folks from various agencies in the interagency that work in national security and foreign policy, like Department of State, Department of Defense, the intel community, working for a year or a year and a half to just help further the coordination amongst all the cabinet. So what I do in DC is a little bit broader than what I would do at Post for Haiti or for Trinidad and Tobago, where I was just before this. I'm basically devising, formulating messaging that helps us to deliver messages about the bilateral relationship. And then if folks are interested, what our, sort of global foreign policy messages are. For the NSC, I am helping the interagency to formulate messaging based on policy decisions that have come directly from the president and the national security advisor, and making sure that things that we're rolling out, especially in this first year, as we really try to set the tone and set the narrative for the Biden-Harris administration, making sure that everybody's on the same page, and also making sure that the agencies are empowered. Because I think there is a misconception sometimes that everything comes down from on high, and then folks just, go out and they, do what they've been instructed to do. But in actuality, a lot of it is, you all know how to do your jobs. State Department, you guys, you're filled with brilliant career folks who have been, experts in your field. And a lot of our policies, while, sometimes the messages shift, the actual substance of the policies don't change. In Haiti, for example, the name of the game is trying to help them form a functioning civil society that, is working alongside USAID and other actors to help develop the country. No matter what administration it is, like, that's what we're trying to do. And I think there was a little bit of hesitancy in the last administration. And hesitancy is like a kind word, but to get out ahead of what came out of the White House. And now we're trying to encourage the departments and agencies to feel empowered to move forward with what they know are good policy decisions. So I went on a little long, but like, those are some of the things that you can see in over the course of a public diplomacy career, whether you're talking about like culture, education, or press.
Thank you so much for sharing, Diplomat Raymond. And you went on just enough time to provide us with so much insights. I love how vulnerable you were and just honest. The biggest feedback we've been getting from this series is that a lot of our members feel comfortable to continue serving our country. A recurring question is, how do you serve the country when things get tough, or when the news doesn't necessarily paint us in a great picture? And I love that you were able to share your perspective on that, and how you're able to continue serving us in spite of what we might see as members of civil society. And I also appreciated how Diplomat Khandil really talked about the skill sets that's necessary, and that it doesn't just limit us to what we might think of, which is, I need to get an international relations degree, I need to learn 3 languages, I need to have traveled to like 5 different continents. But it's basic skills, like making sure that we're reading, we're well read, and it's diversity of information that we're gleaning, making sure that we have strong writing skills, because no matter which cone that we're in, we'll need to relay information to internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. With that, with your specific cones, what tips do you have for the application process? Or maybe if you can talk to us about what your application process felt and looked like. And I know it's shifted in the past couple of years. What are some coping mechanisms that you utilize if you had to? What was it like applying, writing your statement, preparing for the exam? And then once you kind of share your experience, you can leave us with 2 tips that you have for the application, especially if someone's looking to set the application to be one that's focused on political, or set the application from one that's focused on diplomacy. So Matt Khandil, I'll start with you.
I would say that you should seek out a wide breadth of sources for your information. And that means sources that you might not traditionally think of. You can read something without agreeing with it. You can read something that you are not necessarily agreeing with, seek out platforms perhaps that you maybe disagree with on a certain topic. You have to be very familiar with matters of public discussion within the United States. So when I walk into that testing room, I have to be very well informed on both sides of an issue, whatever the issue is. If I turn on the radio in the United States, what are people talking about? And, there's different different radio stations in the US, obviously, that represent different points, but a lot of times they're discussing the same thing, only, perhaps in differing manners. So it's important to be familiar with that. And again, you don't have to agree with it, but you have to be familiar with it. And also make sure that you can write, I would say, quickly, because in this business, done is better than perfect. So just make sure that if you can convey the idea that you want in a way that is intelligible and clear, that is good enough. And we obviously try not to compromise the quality of our work, but sometimes you have deadlines that you have to meet, and you just have to put forward the best work that you can at that point in time with the information that you have. In the testing scenario, you won't be able to revise something, but in real life, in any job, in most cases, you will be able to revise information. And always, be skeptical of the first information that you receive in some sort of crisis situation or a conflict, because oftentimes that information will be wrong. And part of my job as a political officer is to analyze the veracity of information and try to seek out multiple sources. So I think that's very important.
So Raymond, any tips you have about the application process? What could an applicant do to strengthen their application if their focus is to be coned into PD? If you want to maybe talk about your journey, any tips on the examination, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. So again, with the caveat that everything Khulood just said would apply to, trying to enter the Foreign Service and be a public diplomacy coned officer. I would say, I'm probably dealing with brilliant women who are well-read and have researched, everything that is required to sort of be prepared. Something that you might forget along the way that you shouldn't. You also need to be very clear of what your personal narrative is. Increasingly, again, as I mentioned in the beginning, relatability is important, and I think authenticity is more important. A little bit about me. So when I went to interview for the Wrangell Fellowship, I had just come from Burma. I didn't own a suit. My hair was natural and it was like all over the place. It wasn't even cute natural, it was crazy natural. And I think I came in late. I took a look around the room and I saw beautiful like suits, pearls, everyone just looked very well coiffed and they were looking over their notes. And I could not have felt more out of place. And I said to myself, if somehow I make it through today and I get offered this fellowship, it's because they truly cared about the person that I am and what I represent, and not a mold that I'm trying to fit into. Because I think even when we talk about diversity today, we're always trying to distinguish between, well, do you want diversity in face, color, and gender, or do you want it in thought and experience? Like what does diversity and inclusion and equity mean to you? And so I think to the extent that day I was validated in my lived experience, I have always tried to be authentic and I've always tried to be my true self, what is now 10, 11 years later. And so I would charge that to you all. You're entering a much more accessible space. We're not there yet, but I still want you to feel comfortable to be your authentic selves and know who that self is. Sell yourself, like be proud of who you are, embrace all your skills, like Khulood said. Don't minimize, don't like try and adopt what you think the right foreign service officer or the right public diplomacy officer looks like, because we need everyone. And then just the more technical side of it, I think you need to be aware of what are the different factors of globalization and of like the sort of trends of society that are going to inform your work. Like social media, who is using what? How are people communicating? Like, I'm getting older. I don't want to be snapping all day. I don't like TikTok. These are things I have to know. You know what I mean? Like I can't escape these things. And so I'm not going to sort of speak condescendingly about these things, but whatever is sort of new and hip in, you know, the private sector or in, you know, these other spaces that aren't government, don't forget that you have to be aware and familiar with them as well. Like, you know, we're very slow in government sometimes, and we're not always, you know, quick on the uptake, but I think you are a stronger officer and a stronger diplomat when you can be as nimble as possible with the tools that the rest of the world is using. So those are the things that I would say would probably be helpful to remember, not just in applying, but just in going into this career.
Thank you so much again, Diplomat Raymond and Khandil. So the moment that everyone is always interested to hear more from our diplomats about, and those are those myths. Part of the series, at the end, we're actually going to collect every single myth that you guys have helped us debunk, and we're going to convert that into a publication, just because we've heard so many in the last 5 sessions, and I'm pretty sure there's more to come in our last 3 sessions. And so we'll start with you first, with Matt Khandil. If you can share with us the top 5 things that you've heard about the service that you would like to take this opportunity to debunk today. And after this session, we will turn it over into Q&A. So Matt Khandil, what are some crazy things you heard about that you're like, no, there's no way?
Well, the first thing I think would be the security clearance. I heard that it took years and years to get a security clearance. For someone like me, as I had mentioned, I traveled to multiple countries in the Middle East, some of which were sanctioned by the US government, you know, some of which were classified, you know, as state sponsors of terrorism. And I went there as a student, you know, to learn the language. And I was very concerned that those activities that I pursued, particularly because I wanted to join the Foreign Service and because I wanted to learn Arabic, might actually prevent me from getting a security clearance. And that was not the case. I was able to get a security clearance fairly quickly. And I obviously did not have anything in my background that would have precluded getting a security clearance, but you hear a lot of rumors about how difficult it is. And if you've ever traveled to a foreign country, that it's difficult to obtain. And that was not my experience. So that was one myth that I was very happy to debunk. The others, I think that we have discussed that you have to be of a certain demographic or look a certain way, or, you know, have a certain type of name or background to be able to join. And that is also not the case. You also, I think, have to be aware that your background is an asset in many respects. It's not necessarily to your detriment. The other thing is that I don't know if this is a myth or not, but you do have to defend US foreign policy in your personal life as well. So you have to be very careful about what you write on your personal social media. You have to be very careful about what panels you speak on, what sort of associations that you have. There have been some high profile cases within the State Department about people having certain affiliations with certain groups and then their security clearance coming into question. So I'm not sure that that's exactly a myth, but you know, you do give up some certain aspects of your freedom of speech in this job. You are obligated to defend US policy in public, even if you do not agree with it. You do serve all presidents that are elected. You serve all parties. You will serve, you know, different administrations. And it doesn't matter what your personal opinion about any of that is, you are required to defend the policy. So that is one thing that you have to keep in mind.
Thank you so much, Diplomat Khandil. You gave us quite a few, more than 5, so we appreciate that. So we might tap you in the near future, if that's okay, to say, Diplomat Khandil, you gave us like 7. Do you have like 2 more to complete this publication? But thank you so much. You actually gave some really good ones that we don't yet have, especially with the security clearance. That one hasn't come up just yet. And then with the social media aspect as well too. We haven't had any questions about, you know, does my job extend into my personal life? So those were some really good ones. So thank you so much for sharing those. So Matt Raymond, what are share with us the top 5 myths. And if you have more, like Diplomat Khandil, feel free to share that you've heard that you want to take opportunity today to debunk.
So she had some really good ones. I would say the first one that usually comes up, especially with Black women, is like the hair thing. You shouldn't have natural hair. I mean, again, these are things that I heard coming in 10 years ago that I think are less and less relevant, but no less important to continue to reiterate. You can wear whatever hair you want. We're not even tolerating that nonsense anymore. Whatever kind of hair you want to wear it. That's the first myth. Second myth, I think is, so I'm single, and I think this is a very loaded topic. This should be like its own session. I don't even know if I need to get into this right now, but the myth that, you know, you can't have like a romantic life while you're abroad. I don't know how relevant this is, but you can absolutely date. It's tougher for women and you have to be more careful, and there are a lot more things to consider. But if you're in like a metropolitan city, for example, my first tour was Montreal, Canada. And it was, you know, a lot of fun, very open. I was doing a consular job. And so it was very sort of like, it's 9 to 5, and then I'm done. And then I could just live my life. Nobody had to know I was a diplomat. I could do a lot of different activities. And so I think while respecting the boundaries that Khulood laid out in terms of policy and recognizing that you indeed are a diplomat 24/7, especially when you're abroad, you can live the life that you want to live, and you don't have to sort of put extra layers around your interests or whatever it is that you want to do. The third myth is that you can't, that once you're sort of like choosing a cone, you're locked into your cone. So I also want to sort of tread lightly with this one, because once again, when you join the Foreign Service, you're a generalist, you choose a cone, and that kind of guides like how you progress in your career. But I've had friends that, you know, they went the management route, and then they decided, you know what, I really like consular work. I did my first consular tour, and now I want to do this one. So you're not locked into your cone, and you don't need to feel like it's a prison sentence if you decide, oh, I've gone this way and I can't sort of revert. Like, there are mechanisms for you to sort of seek out other cones if you have interest in them, or if the one that you're in isn't for you. Along the same vein, even though many of you are interested in the Foreign Service right now, I would say another myth is that, you know, the Foreign Service is a career for a particular time. It's not. You have folks that are entering in from college, from grad school. You have folks that it's their second career. They tried like, you know, law or the private sector, and now they're doing this. And then you have folks that join the Foreign Service at the very end of their career, like right before they retire. So I'm thrilled that you all are interested in the Foreign Service now, but if you decide to go another route, you should know that the Foreign Service can still be a viable option for your career later on. So don't feel like it's the end all be all and I have to take the test now and have to get in now, because that's just not true. The Foreign Service will be there. On the flip side of that, if you just want to try it out and say, you know what, I'm going to give this 5 years, that's fine too, because that's actually where I kind of was when I started out. As I mentioned, I was interested in international development, and I wasn't sure that, you know, foreign policy and like government was my style. So I said, let me just do the Foreign Service for the 3 or 5 years that I've committed to it via the Wrangle program, and then I'm going to leave. And I didn't. I continued to find joy in it. I've built an incredible community of friends in it. Khulood, like, and we have like sort of a sister, you know, WhatsApp chat where we're like, you know, commiserating with each other and sort of empowering each other and pouring into each other. And you'll find incredible networks like that, like people that very sincerely become your close friends, and sort of help you power through. And so that is something that I think you all should know, similar to the thing about not feeling imprisoned in your cone that you choose. You don't have to feel imprisoned in the job, and you don't have to be scared of pursuing this career because you're like, once I'm in, I'm in. No, you can test it out and see if it's for you, if living abroad is for you, if, you know, being a diplomat 24/7 and defending US policy for you. And if it's not, you can leave. So those are some of the things that I think have come up in conversations that I would offer you to just sort of be aware of what the truth is on those.
Thank you so much. I definitely will be adding Diplomat Raymond to my list as well too for publication time, providing some really great, insightful myths as well too about love and relationships that actually came up in a couple of it actually comes up at least once in every single series that we've had, whether it's can I have kids? And we actually do have one of those questions today. Again, just about, you know, if I'm single, should I get married before joining the Foreign Service? Is it possible for me to meet someone while I'm in the Foreign Service? If I have kids already, can I bring my kids with me? Does my husband need to get a job where I am currently stationed? So that comes up all the time. So I'm glad you kind of addressed it from that perspective. So thank you. To our Q&A, we have so many questions here. I'll start with a couple that I've seen recurring, and this probably Raymond, you might be able to answer some of those since you were part of one of the fellowship programs. So there's two questions. The first question pertaining to the fellowship program is any advice that you have so that they can submit a competitive application? And the second part of that question is it too late for me to apply? What if I missed the minimum criteria in order to enter this program? What are some other options outside of the fellowship?
So first, if you're interested and there's a diplomat in residence, or there's like a sort of, the offices have different names at different schools, but essentially it's an office where they have advisors and counselors that guide you through competitive fellowship and scholarship applications. If anything like that exists, seek them out. They will help you and counsel you through in terms of writing the personal statement, getting everything together. That's what I used at American University because, you know, as I said, like I had never been exposed to this world before. I'm actually like, English is my second language. My first language is Haitian Creole. I've always been sort of, not insecure, but like just sort of, you know, wondering if, am I presenting my strongest argument here in this language? And I don't think there's anything wrong in seeking help out from anyone that, you know, presents themselves as someone that can advise you on that. If you have a diplomat in residence, that's golden, because they're the direct lines to the fellowships, they're the direct lines to the State Department. And not only can they coach you just in terms of the presentation, but just to give you, you know, sort of the insights and like the best practices, give you some of the stories to help, you know, you relate to what it is to be a diplomat and help make your case stronger. So those are my two recommendations as you get ready to apply. And then for other options outside of applying for the fellowships, just take the test. Take it as many times as you need. One thing here's another myth. Once you take the test and you don't pass, like that's the end of your story. No, it's not. I know people that have taken the written test so many times and then gotten through to the oral examination and then have taken that several times. So if this is your passion, if this is what, you know, you want to dedicate your life to, don't let like one or two tests stop you from that, because as far as I know, it's still free to take. I don't know, but I would say continue to go that route. If not, there are, and I need somebody to fact check me on this, but if you were to enter into the State Department through the civilian route and, you know, just work sort of domestically with the State Department. So they're split into two camps: civilian, which primarily works in Washington, D.C., and then Foreign Service, those who are sent abroad. There is a way for you to do a lot of the incredible work towards U.S. foreign policy. You can TDY abroad, which is temporary duty. You can go and work alongside diplomats doing the same work that diplomats are doing. And then after a certain amount of time, you can look into converting into the Foreign Service. The name of the program, I think, has changed, but that's an option. The other option is completely outside of the Foreign Service, which is to say in 2021, the Foreign Service is not the only international affairs game in town. Like, The idea of global is now permeating every single career. It's now a critical component of every single job. And so don't be surprised if you can, work with foreign students, if you can help to further, US economic interests, if you can help to sort of engage civil society in things that are wholly unrelated to the State Department and to the US government. Because there are a lot of institutions, there are a lot of organizations, there are a lot of companies that do global work. And you just sort of have to do your research a little bit and you can find it. So my recommendation is just continue to push. If the Foreign Service is really what you want to do, look into the fellowships, looking into working, either directly as a direct hire with the State Department or as a contractor, and then find your way to find your way into the Foreign Service from there. Look into working at USAID. And if not, like, the Foreign Service is not the only game in town for international affairs.
Thank you so much, Matt Raymond. You talked a little bit about the FSOT. I don't know if Matt Khandil, if you want to jump in on this one, how well can one prepare? Any tips for any books to read, podcasts? What can we do now to prepare for the FSOT? I know you mentioned that you had an ambassador friend that took it a couple times. So maybe that might give some of the folks who probably taken it a couple of times as well to the inspiration and encouragement to keep at it.
Well, I think Kedenard covered it very well. I would be happy to share over email a list of books and some other resources that people can consult. But I do wish to emphasize what Kedenard said, which is being authentic. And being authentic is also a skill. And bringing that to the test is important also, because I think if you go into the test, particularly the oral assessment, trying to represent yourself as something that you're not, I don't think that will yield the result that you're looking for. So I think it is important to show up authentically. Again, be very well read on current events. You also have to be very, very aware about different scientific discussions going on, not in, very deep detail, but you do need to be aware of basic terms that people are using, also sort of entrepreneurship language. There's a lot of private sector language that you need to be familiar with, particularly if you want to be a reporting officer, either a political or an economic officer. We do advocate for US businesses overseas and US exports. So even though you might not have a business degree or an MBA, you do need to be familiar with certain types of vocabulary. And so I think just familiarizing yourself with certain vocabulary is very useful, and being able to showcase the breadth and depth of your vocabulary, as well as working on eloquence and being able to express ideas very clearly, and making sure that you are honing your briefing skills, however that is, and being able to explain concise information and taking very disparate sources of information and trying to collate them together into an idea, and also adding your original analysis. And, of course, being able to argue a different side that you might not agree with. I mean, Kedenard and I, have been in the situation, as I think anybody would in any job nowadays, where, your leadership is seeing on Twitter that a certain status or video is going viral, and you're going to have to compile information about it. So you really have to be able to get a lot of information from different sources, put it together, and be able to present it in a way that is useful, as well as add your own analysis. And anything that you can do to gain those skills is extremely useful. One other way that you could study or gain experience would be to volunteer. We haven't mentioned volunteering yet, but volunteering in your community, it doesn't even have to be related to international affairs, is a good way to gain skills, as well as to be able to practice some of these skill sets, because you might not be able to brief somebody in the current job that you have now. Internships, of course, the idea of an unpaid internship is perhaps not one that all of us support. However, if we could frame it maybe as volunteering, or if you have, of course, nobody wants to advocate for uncompensated labor, but if there is a way for you to voluntarily volunteer your skill set, that's also a way that you can gain some of these skill sets to do better on the test.
Thank you, Diplomat Khandil. And speaking of skill sets, what should you highlight when submitting your resume? Are there any extracurriculars that would shine in the eyes of the State Department?
Well, again, this goes back to what Kedenard and I are saying, it's who you are. I mean, you want to showcase who you are. It's not what you want them to think that you are, right? If you have a certain hobby, I mean, of course, if it's appropriate, list it. If that's who you are, I mean, you shouldn't try to doctor, your resume too much. I mean, of course, have people look it over, have your mentors look it over, have, people in the field look it over, but, don't try to doctor it in a way that you think is going to, I mean, I don't want to say game the system because that makes it sound kind of sinister, but I mean, bring your whole self to your resume. And if you have that particular hobby or that particular skill or that interest, highlight it. I mean, you don't try to hide who you are because you think that it will enhance your chances of being hired. I don't think that it will.
And then if I could add to that, I think it is increasingly important in light of that to know who you are and to be able to explain it. Like we sit with ourselves so much that we assume I know who I am and I know how to explain who I am. But as many of you have been in the situation where you got to introduce yourself and give an interesting fact, and you're like, oh shit, like what's my interesting fact? Like what's my hobby? You know what I mean? So you actually have to practice that. You should actually write it down. No matter how many times you've written a narrative or a personal statement to get into school or to get into a job, you have to sort of remind yourself and refamiliarize yourself with what is your personal narrative? How do you think that distinguishes you from someone else? And is it consistent? And again, to Khulood's point, like you don't have to try and be another person. You don't have to try and draw all these different things that you think make you an interesting person. You're all interesting people. Just weave together all of your lived experiences, find the thread that tells the story, and then make sure that you're familiar with that. So then when folks ask you, what kind of person is so-and-so? Like what motivates you? What do you like to do? You're not drawing blanks. So yeah, I think that's key.
Thank you, Diplomat Raymond. So we always get the language question. It's the most popular one. Every single session, our attendees want to know, do I need to learn a second language? If I do know a second language, do I need to be an expert in that second language? And I know Diplomat Raymond, you talked about how English wasn't your first language. So we would love to hear, how did you transition into mastering English and maybe leveraging your first language as an FSO? And then over to you, Diplomat Khandil, to share with us your journey in learning Arabic. So we can start with you, Diplomat Raymond.
Okay, so that reminds me of the saying, anything that's worth doing is worth doing 100%, is worth throwing yourself into. If you're interested in a language, make sure that you learn it and make sure that you want to serve in a country where that language is spoken. Again, back to the authenticity piece, don't just like learn 3 weeks of Spanish on Duolingo and then not know what to do with it and then get mad when you get assigned to like Mexico City or Ciudad Juarez. You know what I mean? Like, decide what you want, commit to it, and then be prepared to like be used for that. Because one of the things you have to learn early in the Foreign Service is the idea of worldwide availability. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit story about me and how I ended up in Montreal. So I told y'all that I was interested in international development. This means I was interested in working in developing countries, in poor countries. I thought that if I gamed the system and I told them, well, I have French and Haitian Creole from having served, from being Haitian American. Therefore, can you please send me to Senegal, Benin, Togo? Like, I thought I was being real slick about it. Boom, they sent me to Montreal, Canada, because I already had French. And I was like, wait, I did not join the Foreign Service to go to Canada. I did not like spend all this time saying, I want to bridge international development and foreign policy. And you're sending me to a place that's essentially like US light. No disrespect to the Canadians who I love, but that totally backfired, right? And I wasn't prepared for that. And despite the fact that I had an incredible time, I'm so grateful for my time in Montreal. I met friends that I will have for life. It's just to show you that worldwide availability is real. In your first assignment, like you don't have a lot of control over where you're going, so you need to be fully prepared to go where you're going and use the language that you say you have. If you're not coming into the foreign service with language, that's totally okay. Language helps you. Language gives you an edge. If you have it, you should use it, but don't be discouraged if you don't have it at all and you've already started the process, because, you know, you have other skills that make you a competent, you know, diplomat, and they'll teach you the languages that you need to go where you need to go. So that's just my experience. Obviously, having Haitian Creole and French helped me immensely when I went to Haiti. I was already in a position where I would have a lot of interaction with the front office, that is the ambassador, the DCM, our number 1 and number 2s at missions. But because of my language, I was indispensable. At moments where like they were like, we got to have one extra person in the meeting, they were like, it has to be Kedenard because she has Haitian Creole and French and she's going to communicate. So those are like the moments where that skill gives you an edge. And so definitely throw yourselves into it if you want to do it, because it will make you invaluable as a member of the team.
Matt Kendall, do you want to share? We had one of our participants want to know your journey in learning Arabic.
So I started studying Arabic in college. I just enrolled in a course at my university and I studied it throughout college, and I studied abroad also. After I graduated from college, I studied a few years in the Middle East. I studied very hard and I was able to thankfully achieve a high score when I was testing to come into the State Department. So to Kedenard's point, you can learn a language before you join, you can learn a language during your service. So there is no requirement, there's no foreign language requirement, but it does help to have a background in any foreign language. I was assigned to Jerusalem as my first post, which is a Hebrew and Arabic speaking post. So I was able to use my foreign language skills in that post as well as subsequent posts. I would also emphasize that there is a difference between reading and writing. So just because you might not be the most eloquent speaker in a certain foreign language, it doesn't mean that you can't improve your reading skills. And reading skills are very important as well, especially as we have emphasized different social mediums to express either opposition or support for US policy. You have to be able to read Twitter very fast. You have to be able to listen to YouTube videos, maybe spreading disinformation in whatever language it is in. And sometimes you might be the only officer that can do that. So I would caution people that you can emphasize different skills. And even though you might not have the best active skills, for example, you can have good passive skills in terms of reading. And there should be no limitation on how well you can read, because you are able to constantly practice that. And I know sometimes people can be kind of embarrassed about, you know, speaking a foreign language, especially when we're adults and we might be very articulate in English, and then we just, you know, kind of revert to this very low level of language in whatever foreign language. So I understand there might be some embarrassment about that, but, you know, reading is increasingly, I think, indispensable. I mean, Kedenard, feel free to comment, because this is your you know, social media realm, but we use social media also in the political cone because we include it in our cables, which is also something new. And, you know, in the age of citizen journalism, we can say in our cables, you know, a user on Twitter with 1 million followers tweeted X or tweeted Y. And that is information that we are sometimes obligated to convey to policymakers in DC, because even if we have not intended something, or if there's a rumor about what the US government is or is not doing in a certain country or on a certain issue or on a certain policy, it's very important that we convey the information that people are discussing in their native language. And sometimes even governments will post something in English and then they will post something in a foreign language that is completely different than what they have posted in English. So it's very important to be aware of the nuance. And I would also say one underappreciated skill perhaps is what people don't say, and your familiarity with culture again, and cultural appropriateness in certain situations is indispensable. So I have served in multiple countries, I'm sure Kedenard has as well, where the host country or that country's culture dictates that it is rude to decline a request, especially from a foreigner, especially from a foreign dignitary or from a diplomat. So sometimes they are telling us no, but they're just not using the explicit word no. They're telling us in other ways. And we have to be perceptive enough to be able to understand that when they are trying to save face or in a culturally appropriate manner, articulate to us that they have declined our request without explicitly saying so.
Yeah, and
while you guys are on the issue of language, and Diplomat Raymond, my apologies, I don't want us to lose the train of thought on the language piece. One of our attendees wanted to know, does it matter if you specify your language level, like B1 or C2? Can you guys tell us about that? Like, what is B1, C2? Is it even relevant?
I'm not familiar with the letters, but in the State Department, and I think throughout the government, certainly in the Department of Defense, we rank both speaking and reading. So like if you have a 3-3 in Haitian Creole, it means you speak it proficiently and you can read it proficiently. You can read and understand, comprehend what you're reading. Again, to my earlier point, I don't want to tell anybody to lie, and I don't want to tell anybody to lie by omission or withhold information. But if you have a language and you disclose that you have that language, particularly when you start in A100, which is the training period, sort of like how to be a diplomat before you get your first assignment. If you are like, you know, I'm a heritage Spanish speaker, but I'm really passionate about Asia. I really want to try my hand at working in China. It is a disservice to you to put Spanish down, because it's absolutely likely that they could say, look, we really need a Spanish speaker for this tour. So that's what I'll say, and take that information and do with it what you will. But that is how it usually goes when you're disclosing that you have a language. That's why I said, if you're using it, just be prepared to go serve and use it when you serve.
Note taken, Diplomat Raymond. And I love how initially you were talking about social media. So in addition to serving in a volunteer capacity for WCAPS through GAD, I actually manage a corporate social responsibility and government relations firm. And we work heavily on what we call a hashtag campaign, which is using social media to advance peace and security, and some of our diplomatic priorities. But a lot of our team members are like, why do we need to understand Instagram? Why do we need to be a part of a lot of these social media? Why are we tracking this leader and what they're posting or reposting or what they're liking? And so I'm going to bring back to them, the diplomats do it. That's why we're doing it. Because it's very important, like you mentioned, not only just understanding how to use that tool and leveraging it, but I know Diplomat Khandil also talked about just understanding those underlying tones, right? Maybe they might not say anything at all. Maybe they didn't retweet something, and that might be a message worth being able to translate over to internally from the political side, and then back to Diplomat Raymond externally on the PD side. Earlier, you talked about, Diplomat Khandil, about maybe when we're learning a language, or maybe we do know a language, but we're uncomfortable speaking it. So reading is also an option. We did have a question about imposter syndrome. Do you guys feel imposter syndrome? Like, do you experience that as a diplomat? And how do you combat that professionally?
Yeah, so I think all of us experience it. And I read an article recently that I think emphasized how women are almost trained to experience imposter syndrome, which I had not considered, that it's also societal. There's this societal expectation that women have imposter syndrome, right? So, absolutely, I think, and men have it too. That's also something to bear in mind, that men also suffer from this too. And that I think would be a very interesting topic to perhaps address on its own. And I think that perhaps WCAPS has done that, and maybe it's worth having a follow-up session, because it is such a big topic that covers so many different issue sets, such as, insecurity. There's a psychological element. There's, so many ways that we can unpack that. Again, you can compensate for that by reading a lot about your subject, really mastering your subject, really going out of your way to make sure that you are an expert in the material, seeking out a broad number of sources. Also, anticipating questions is a very good skill to have for this job and for any job, I think. If you are in any position where you have leadership, you will try to think of what question they might have about whatever you're working on. If you're working on a certain project or on a report, that you can anticipate questions and try to proactively find the answers that will make you look competent. And all of us on this call are competent. So going that extra step of anticipating questions and proactively finding answers, as well as finding answers from different sources, that's very important. I also think doing a lot of the work for your leadership or your boss or your supervisor is very important, meaning, you always respond. So even if you don't have the answer, if your boss sends you a note or your whoever and says, does anybody have information about this, or did anybody hear about this, whatever the question is, and you just say, no, I don't have information about that, instead of not responding. Because one issue that I notice is that people assume that because you did not respond, that the answer is no, meaning that if my boss sent me a note and I don't respond, that means no, I don't have information about that. But your boss might not actually think that, and it might actually make you look incompetent because you didn't respond, even if the response is negative. I don't have information about that. I don't know what it is. Or you can also say, I don't have information about that, but I will find out, and make sure that you find out, because it's so easy to just send an email and say that you'll follow up and then just not follow up. But what really distinguishes a superior employee in any organization is their ability to follow up. And that can be hard. You can rely on technology. You can send yourself reminders. If you're using, certain email programs, there's a way for you to put a setting on the email to follow up. You can rely on technology to help you. You can just have also like a to-do list. So, there's ways for you to sort of outsource some of that mental effort, but really just try to follow up, because even demonstrating the effort also will help you demonstrate competency. And I think will also help overcome some of the imposter syndrome, because none of us have all the answers, right? But at least if we demonstrated the effort, and if you're not demonstrating effort, then that can contribute to the sense that, maybe you're not qualified or incompetent or something, and you don't want ever to give that impression, or to ever to give anybody any excuse to reinforce any stereotype about you or whatever background that you come from.
Raymond,
Yes.
do you want to add to that?
I do.
And maybe touch upon fear, if you could pull from some examples, because we do have one of our attendees. She came in as an immigrant, and she's a little bit nervous about whether or not her immigrant status, although she's now a U.S. citizen, may impact her as she goes through the process. But just from what she shared with us in our Q&A, she's just a little bit intimidated by the process. So maybe we can talk about overcoming imposter syndrome and extinguishing fear, because we need all great people to serve our country.
Yes, indeed. So imposter syndrome is real. I would say there are two sayings that I sort of came into this with, and then after hearing Khulood speak, I have a third. I'll mention the third up front, which is effort and enthusiasm go a long way. So piggybacking off of her point about, volunteer, offer that if you don't have the answer, you'll get it. Those things make a difference. Those things can actually psychologically make you more confident, which leads me to my second point, which is it's very important to have confidence. And confidence and faking it until you make it are two very different things. I actually hate the term fake it till you make it. I don't think that that's helpful, because one, it implies that you don't have the skills and that you're reinforcing imposter syndrome. And then two, well, what happens if you're confronted with something that like you don't know and you're faking that you do have that information, and then it just cascades. I think that, you know, having confidence is meaning that you have prepared, is meaning that, you know, you're digging deep to reassure yourself that you're supposed to be there, which leads me to my third point, which is you can never over prepare, not for what we do, and not for, as Khulood mentioned, the things, you know, that we have to sort of synthesize and brief, the times where you find yourself in, you know, a public setting where you have to speak on behalf of the government, or the times where, you know, you're going to have to be like on the spot for a very intense, you know, meeting or whatever. You can't be over prepared. I don't want folks thinking that you're going into this job to be a slave to your work, to have unreasonable hours, that you'll never get work-life balance, that you can't advocate for yourself. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is that I think more and more what I'm seeing is that folks, you know, want to rely on just what they have, without continuing to invest, without continuing to be curious, without continuing to learn, and without like putting in the hours to practice your brief, to know your brief, to like write things down over and over again, to make sure that, you know, you understand your subject matter. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with being geeky about like stuff that you love. There's nothing wrong with being nerdy. There's nothing wrong with reading something 4 times. I actually remember this, and this is to speak to our friend that might be insecure about being an immigrant. I remember, you know, as a Black American, so I'm Haitian American, but I'm also Black American, growing up in DC, and being made fun of for like, you know, reading, and being made fun of for like, you know, going over things a million times, because it looks more cool to just sort of know and be laissez-faire and whatever. And that's just not the name of the game. So you can never be over prepared. Faking it until you make it is not confidence. And effort and enthusiasm go a long way. I think that those 3 things, if you keep those things in your mind, it will help to chip away at imposter syndrome. We have a long way to go. You can't get rid of that. I get it. But those are the 3 things that I would offer up as advice.
Yeah, I would also add asking for help. And I agree that the fake it till you make it mantra is detrimental in some respects. You know, obviously, any of us are just as deserving as anybody else to sit at the table and to express our ideas. But we do need to ask for help. And that was something that I needed to overcome at the beginning of my career, because I thought that asking for help would make me look weak and that would make me look incompetent, but actually it achieved the opposite. And me not asking for help meant, you know, that I was sometimes not providing the highest level of analysis that I could. So, you know, ask for help. And if you don't know something, it's fine to say, I don't know. And people will trust you more if you're honest and say that you don't know about something, but I will find out. And then you can even ask, you know, your boss or your colleague for advice about, you know, potential sources to get that information. But, you know, never, ever lie, never make something up that you don't know. You know, if information is preliminary, always caveat that, you know, we just got this, you know, from some, you know, rando on Twitter, you know, always caveat, you know, the information and the source and evaluate the source of the information. But, you know, please ask for help. You know, I'm happy to serve as a resource for this group. You know, I've already told Maritza that she can share my email with anybody if they would like to discuss any issue or ask for help in any specific professional or personal issue that they're facing. To the particular woman who comes from an immigrant background, you know, an American citizen is an American citizen, whether they've been an American citizen for 1 day or 1 hour, or they were born an American citizen, it doesn't matter. You know, you're just as qualified for a clearance as somebody else. I discussed the clearance process. You know, if you have family overseas that are immediate family members, that could potentially slow down your security clearance, but it doesn't preclude you. You know, we have colleagues who have immediate family members in countries that are state sponsors of terrorism, you know, that are in countries where no US embassy exists, you know, so it's definitely possible. There's nothing about you or your background that would preclude you from serving. In fact, you would probably be an asset to the State Department and the Foreign Service. The Secretary has issued a call for a foreign service that looks like America, and America is a nation of immigrants. And we would definitely benefit from your foreign language skills if you natively speak a foreign language, or even not at the native level. We would definitely benefit from your skill set. So I hope that I encourage you to apply.
Thank you so much. So we have two final questions to wind us down for today. The first question is that I've heard that most or all FSOs have to serve at least one consular tour. Is that true?
Yes.
Okay. And then all right, since Diplomat Raymond answered that so quickly, we'll slide another question in there. Is there a challenge or barrier to serving in areas where you have familial connections? For example, I would like to serve in the Caribbean, but I have family there. So I've heard conflicting opinions. So Pat Raymond, do you want to share?
Sure. Serving in Haiti was the most difficult tour I've ever had, point blank, period. I've worked in Pakistan, on Turkey, and it was no question. I think that the Haitian diaspora and the citizens of Haiti have already had a very tense relationship because, unfortunately, given Haiti's like socioeconomic and political situation and extreme brain drain, you have some mistrust on the part of Haitians living there, thinking that diaspora want to govern for them, that they want to make decisions for them. And so I was going into that not only as diaspora, but as diaspora representing the United States. One thing that you have to make very clear up front, regardless of the fact that I'm Haitian American and that I can offer up, more relatability and a little bit more, dynamism to our relationship because I speak Haitian Creole and I know the culture and I'm familiar with some things. I'm an American representing the United States and its interests. There can be no equivocation about that. And so a lot of Haitians didn't know how to take me. It was difficult because a lot of times, there are places that I wanted to go that I couldn't go because I'm a US diplomat and not just diaspora coming to visit and hang out. And then I think lastly, what probably speaks to the question is the conflict of interest and the pressure that maybe family and friends would place on you. So I had it too. Like my family, they're not wealthy, we're not elite. Like my family came to the United States with very little, and I still have family members in Haiti that are considered poor. And so I get can you help me get a visa? Can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And it's tough. It's tough to walk that fine line, not only with wanting to help family and friends if you have them there, but also just in general to see people that you share so much with, that you want to help, that you want the best for. Even when I was in Montreal, Canada, for my first assignment, they have a huge Haitian diaspora there. And I felt that pressure there. So this is absolutely something that I would not want to sugarcoat. I think it's different depending on what countries you go to. I have friends that not only have heritage in like Mexico and Brazil, but also are dual citizens. They continue to hold passports to those countries because for certain countries, you can be a dual national and still be a diplomat. And so I think it's subjective and it depends on the country. If you don't feel like you're going to have undue pressure, if you don't feel like it's going to be an emotional tug of war, it could be an absolutely rewarding experience and you could be such an asset. Even though Haiti was a difficult assignment for me personally, I was such an asset at a critical time. I developed a great relationship with my ambassador that I will have until this day that helped me get to the NSC and that, will serve me in my career. And so, yes, it was the toughest experience. I don't regret it at all. But it's something that you're going to have to do the personal research on and ultimately make the decision about if it's going to be worth it for you.
Okay, out of the interest of respecting our distinguished diplomats' time, this is our final question, and that's for both diplomats. What's one thing you wish you knew about the Foreign Service prior to entering? And Diplomat Raymond, we'll start with you, and then Diplomat Khandil, you can close us out.
Sorry, I was reading the chat and I was not paying attention. Can you repeat the question?
No worries. So the final question is, what's one thing you wish you knew about the Foreign Service prior to joining?
One thing that I wish I knew, finances. This is something very important. The Foreign Service is incredible for helping young people who may not have had like any idea about like all the benefits that, you know, you can sort of get in the world. Like we have a pension program that I think no longer exists throughout the government. Khulood, correct me if I'm wrong, but like I think like the State Department is one of the last government agencies to have like the TSP in addition to, you know, you sort of contributing to your overall like retirement package. And the benefits that you get while you're abroad, which are obviously that you're not paying rent, great health insurance, some of the benefits packages that you get as a part of your salary, depending on where you serve. Like we talk about hardship a lot of times, but it's not just hardship. It's just like, you know, the different compensation that you get for where you live. Obviously, like we're not in it for the money. There are perhaps some careers where you could be making a ton more, but I think in terms of, you know, setting you up so you can understand what you're entitled to is something that I wish I knew. Everything else you sort of get in terms of what's great about this career, but paying attention to your finances, investing in yourself, making sure that you're paying into your pension as much as you can. Those are some of the things I wish I paid more attention to when I started.
So Matt Khandil, what's one thing that you wish you would have known prior to entering the service?
I wish I had known that I could ask for help, because as I mentioned earlier, I think that was one mistake I made in my career, was not fully disclosing to my colleagues when I was struggling with a particular issue, because again, perhaps it was because of imposter syndrome or whatever term we want to assign. I thought that it would make me look incompetent, when actually it was the opposite, that by not asking for help, I perhaps portrayed myself in a way that I did not intend. So I would encourage people to ask for help, and it doesn't make you look incompetent if you ask for help, especially when you're in the beginning of a position or a new assignment. You know, really take advantage of being new in a job to ask for help and get information, because if you sit and you wait 6 months or 1 year and then you ask a question, it's like, well, wait, what were you doing this whole time? You know, so, you know, ask for help, and ask for it from different sources, and it doesn't make you look weak.
Thank you so much for those wonderful insights. So at WCAPS, we believe global issues demand a variety of perspectives. That's why Ambassador Bonnie Jenkins, and now officially Undersecretary Bonnie Jenkins, created this platform, WCAPS, devoted to women of color, that cultivates a strong voice and network for its members, while encouraging dialogue and strategies for engaging in policy discussions on an international scale. Through our dedication to WCAPS mentorship, partnerships, and our passion for changing the global community landscape, we remain committed to achieving our vision of advancing the leadership and professional development of women of color in the fields of international peace, security, and conflict transformation. While the global community is facing with so many issues related to worldwide health, security, peacekeeping, weapons of mass destruction, non-proliferation, and the intersection of national and international security, when there is no sustained or significant voice from people of color, particularly women of color, who are often the most affected and who are also community leaders in many parts of the world, we at WCAPS change that. So with that, I would like to send a special acknowledgement to Undersecretary Bonnie Jenkins for creating this amazing platform so that Global Advocacy and Diplomacy could host sessions like we're hosting today. Also like to thank our distinguished diplomats, Kedenard, Raymond, fellow Haitian sister, so proud, and fellow diplomat Khandil, so proud, fellow woman. I'm like, oh, I move with a different sense of just, not just proud, but my own sense of renewed strength when I enter the field of national security and public diplomacy, but from the private sector side as a consultant. And certainly last but not least, our diplomat who has been so impactful, Diplomat Victoria Latortue Durgana Latortue, who actually served as one of our first speakers and fell in love with the series and has stayed along for each session, ensuring that we could find amazing more women of color diplomats to come in and share their knowledge, skills, and most importantly, to translate the fire and zeal that all of our aspiring diplomats should have as they make that decision to enter into the service. So again, thank you all of you for your time. Thank you to our attendees for the amazing questions. We answered 21 questions tonight. Thank you so much, distinguished diplomats. Continue to stay safe, take good care. United, we will overcome. Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.